шунаахан.
Эрик Ливний. По-моему, это он. Не, вот это он. Добрый день, уважаемые участники. У нас сегодня рабочим языком является данной сессии английский, поэтому я буду модерировать на английском языке. Но у нас также есть синхронный перевод на узбекский язык и на русский, и вы можете воспользоваться наушниками. Пожалуйста, кто не взял, у вас есть буквально минутка получить свои наушники и иметь возможность слышать в переводе. With a great pleasure, I would like to start our roundtable that is being called The Economics of the Poverty. And it's a great privilege to be speaking here on the margins of a very distinguished forum that we are witnessing today. And this particular roundtable is meant to take to a much lower, to really go in depth and drill into the details of how the investment, the human capital, the social protection efforts, safety nets can help the governments to address and tackle the issue of poverty. As you know, around 700 million people around the world are living in the poverty, and that's if we count living on the $1.9 a day. And hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, are suffering from the hunger. So the poverty has got exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, by emerging challenges and issues that the world is facing in the last 2 years. So we thought it would be extremely important to try to discuss the issue of the equitable development, eroding safeguards, equity, continuity of service delivery, the issue of integrity, if we may, the response to COVID pandemic, the protective measures that governments did take around the world or should take in future so that the responses that government make really benefit poor people and help them alleviate the poverty. With a great pleasure, I would like to introduce to you the members of the panel discussion group today. First of all, we have Olimxon Rustamov, who is a Deputy Minister, the Ministry of Investment and Foreign Trade of Uzbekistan, here with us today. Mr. Abid Hakimov, a Director of the Center for Economic Research and Reforms, and also acting as a Deputy Advisor to President of Uzbekistan on economic issues. We have Matilda Dimovska, Resident Representative of UNDP, Uzbekistan. It's also very refreshing for me to have women on the panel, and it's great. We have Philippe Orange, who is a Director for Western Balkans, Middle East and Asia of the French Development Agency, who traveled to Tashkent to participate in this roundtable. And last but not the least, Eric Livni, the Regional Economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, I would like to, without any further ado, to give a floor to our first speaker. And we've agreed that the first speaker will be providing kind of an anchoring presentation. It will be Mr. Abid Hakimov, speaking about the experience of Uzbekistan in alleviating poverty. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And it is an honor to speak in front of such a distinguished guests and the experts all around the world. Thank you very much, Ms. Umarova. So I'm really glad that under the scope of this conference we are paying attention to the poverty reduction policies, because we hope that maybe we will have this kind of big another event just for the poverty reduction policies also in Uzbekistan. So as you know that in Uzbekistan, Aziza remembers that because she used to work a long time in the UNDP. So until 2016, we didn't have anything related to the poverty. So until 2016, we always wrote to some project or some document, and always it's called welfare improvement strategy, not the poverty reduction strategy. So from 2017, Uzbekistan clearly acknowledged that, the existence of the poverty and its seriousness. And, in 2020, the the president of the Uzbekistan addressed the poverty issue on the his address to the Senate and the Parliament of the Uzbekistan. So when it comes to the importance, yes, Aziza told that it became even more important when it comes to this pandemic years. So according to the assessment of the UNICEF, only during the last 2 years, so the poverty, or child poverty in the world increased almost twice, and it's more than 100 million, the children. So in 2020, the joint study with the World Bank and our center conducted, and it's also said that, that during the pandemic year, about more than 500,000 families were kind of vulnerable to the poverty because of this pandemic. So if we look to the Uzbekistan's experience since 2000, so the first thing what we have done that we created, the whole government structure which is responsible for the whole poverty reduction, the policies. So the first Minister of Economic and the Industry of the Republic of Uzbekistan was transformed into the Minister of Economic Development and the Poverty Reduction of the Republic of Uzbekistan. So as you know, during this year, we implemented another innovation. So we have right now the agency which is under this ministry, who is responsible for development for each community, and this community development program, also this agency which is responsible for the community development, is also kind of a huge leap. It will be a huge leap or huge step in the poverty reduction strategy of Uzbekistan. So as you know, in Uzbekistan, we have 14 regions. In 14 regions, we have 207 towns and cities. In this 207 towns and cities, we have 9,315 mahallas in the counties. And all these mahallas, they are kind of, contains the households about from 400 to 1,000 households. And each mahalla now, they have knowledgeable person who used to work in the upper levels, and they are kind of really responsible for the poverty reduction policies of the government at the mahalla level. So in Uzbekistan, we never had this kind of work before. So at the mahalla, at the community level, work started since this 2022. And when we analyzed the poverty reduction policies, we always seen that at the top we have really the strong human capital capacity, and in the middle we have, yes, it is lower than this, but in the bottom we didn't have enough human capital capacity who could really understand the government's policies and realize these government policies. So this innovation, so this we call it assistance of the Hakims. This innovation really brings more human capital to the bottom level and to perform more effective poverty reduction policies. When we talk about the poverty reduction policies, we have to talk about the innovation also. With the help of the international organizations and the World Bank, the government is implementing right now the single registry of the socially protected people. So now all these social protection, the payments, everything has been automatized. So it is working right now. So right now about 30 different types of social protection payments are given from the single automatized system. So if you look at the poverty reduction policies during this until 2020, so the people who received the social protection benefits, so it more than doubled. So in 2019, it was about like 600,000 households used to receive social protection benefits. So right now it's about 1,400,000. So the 1,400,000 households are receiving social protection benefits. If you look to the, the payments, the money which government used to pay, it increased almost 5 times. So as you can see that, the inclusion by the, the social protection system improved significantly. And I think that the most important step during the poverty reduction policies of the Uzbekistan, I should say that first we adopted our national poverty line. So in 2021, we announced the minimum consumer expenditures. So it was 440,000. At that time, it was about the 26% of per capita income, which was based on, if you compare it to other developing economies, it is really good number. And this year, it's about 490,000. It's about $49. And I think, if you compare 2020 and 2021, you should see that under this national poverty line, the poverty reduced significantly. But, Minister of Statistics and, the World Bank should announce it officially, so that's why I'm not going to say this number here, so unless they say this officially. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, so what is our goal for the next 5 years? So as President outlined already, so that for the next 5 years, we want to reduce poverty twice. And, in order to reduce this poverty twice, we have to, work the following directions. So first direction of the poverty reduction policy in Uzbekistan is entrepreneurship and, the employment. So the government is, for example, let's say only this year is providing about the 10 trillion, so it's about $1 billion, the small credits for the, the poor households in order to start their, entrepreneurship. Other than this, we have about 20 different types of subsidies which are given to this kind of people who wants to start their entrepreneurship or, the small farms or something like this. And other than this, we have to say that, the social protection system will be one of the main pillars of this poverty reduction strategy for the next 5 years. So there is a going talks that we will create the government agencies who will be responsible for the whole the social protection system, as in other countries like unified social protection, the government agency. And one more thing I would like to mention that, when in 2019 our center started this poverty, the studies, we visited small villages, small towns, and did lots of household surveys. And when we analyzed the lots of household surveys, and when we analyze nowadays also, we see that, the poverty is much more related, not only entrepreneurship or like this, and it is also related with the education, it is also related with the healthcare, it is also related to the environment, it is also related with, the finding new, the education opportunities. So that's why for the next 5 years, our poverty reduction strategies will be going through these different lines. So the one thing is like education. So as you have seen already on the presentation of the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, so the higher education accession. If you can swap the slide, please. Slide what Next one, yes. Next one. Okay, next one, please. Next one, please. Again, next one.
It seems like we missed all interesting slides.
Yeah. Can you switch to the next slide, please? Okay, so you see that, the education is kind of becoming one of the main pillars of the poverty reduction, and the healthcare is becoming one of the main pillars of the poverty reduction strategy of the Uzbekistan. So according to our plans, so when we developed this poverty reduction strategy with the help of the UNDP, we have seen that there is a strong emphasis on the gender issues also. So we are planning to educate more women than the men in order to, improve the poverty significantly in Uzbekistan, because according to the studies of the center, so the increase in the women's enterprise and the woman-headed business owners significantly improves the GDP per capita in Uzbekistan. So that's why, our poverty reduction strategy for the next 5 years will be directed on, first direction, it will be entrepreneurship. Second one is employment. Then we have education, healthcare, and environment issues. So this kind of broad, the poverty reduction strategy will be implemented, and we hope that by the end of the 2026, we will achieve our goal, which is, the reduction of the poverty in Uzbekistan 2 times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for setting the tone, but also providing for us the overarching framework, because what you mentioned as a key pillars of the poverty reduction strategy will be exactly what our esteemed guests will be talking today in their remarks, and specifically the issue of employment, the strategy making, the climate change and how it's linked, as well as the education as a factor to create the social lifts for people and elevate the poverty. Now, without any further ado, I would like to give a floor to the Deputy Minister for Foreign Trade and Investment, Olimxon Rustamov. And it's very important that Olimxon Rustamov, before joining the ministry, he was specifically working at the SOE, at the heart, mortar and bricks of the real sector of the economy. So employment creation is very important, and in his speech he specifically will tell us how Uzbekistan is trying to alleviate the poverty through investment promotion and employment creation in the country. Thank you very much. Olimxon aka, пожалуйста, bemalol.
Assalomu alaykum avvalambor. Hurmatli davra suhbati ishtirokchilari, azizaxon. Avvalambor hamma ishtirokchilarni bugun davlatimiz rahbari hurmatli Shavkat Miromonovich boshidagi ilk bor bunday formatda tashkil etilgan Toshkent xalqaro investitsiya forumida ishtirok etgani uchun o'z minnatdorchiligimni bildirmoqchiman. Ishonchim komilki, bugun forumda ishtirok etayotgan har bir ishtirokchi mamlakatimizda yaratgan shu qulay investitsiya muhitini shakllantirish va investorlar ishonchini yanada mustahkamlash borasida amalga oshgan iqtisodiy islohotlar va uning natijalari bo'yicha yaqindan tanisha olish imkoniyatiga ega bo'ladi. Shuning uchun, demak, biz prezidentimiz tomonidan tadbirkorlarga yaratilgan qo'shimcha yengilliklar natijasida 21-yilda amalga oshirilgan iqtisodiy o'sish kuzatildi. Ruxsatchilar bilan shu 21-yilda investitsiya ish tushirilgan investitsiya loyihalari va yaratilgan yangi ish o'rinlari to'g'risida qisqacha axborot bersam.
Iltimosim bor, Olimxon aka, masalan, slaydlarni almashtirish kerak bo'lsa, aytib tursangiz yaxshi bo'lardi.
Nima deysiz?
Следующий deb, keyingisi deb slaydlar.
Xo'p.
Rahmat.
Xo'p. Amalga oshirilgan ishlar natijasida bizda 21-yilda mana slaydga ahamiyat bersanglar, demak, 13.12 milliard dollarlik 15.488 ta loyihalar ishga tushirildi hamda 274 mingta ish o'rinlari yaratildi. Bu demak bizda davlat investitsiya dasturiga asosan 5.8 milliardga teng bo'lgan 318 ta loyihalarimiz ishga tushirildi. Shu bilan birga hududiy investitsiya loyihalarida 7.4 milliard dollarga teng bo'lgan 15.117 ta demak loyihalarimiz ishga tushirib 226 mingta ish o'rinlari yaratildi. Shu bilan birga demak biz aytib o'tishimiz kerak, 22-yilda bu ishlarni davom ettiramiz hamda 294 million dollarga bo'lgan 285 ta loyihalarni 21-yilda ta'minlandi shu tashkil etilgan hukumat komissiyasi tomonidan va 6,5 mingta yangi ish o'rinlari yaratildi. Respublika darajasida shu tashkilotlar tomonidan joylarga chiqqandagi shahar tumanlariga joyiga chiqib tadbirkorlik manzilli ishlari olib borish natijasida bizda demak 1.3 milliard dollarlik qo'shimcha 4.399 ta yangi loyihalar ishga tushirildi hamda 45 mingta yangi ish o'rinlari yaratildi. Tarmoqlar kesimida ko'radigan bo'lsak, demak, bevosita sanoat sohasida 4.416 ta foydalanishga topshirildi ishlab chiqarish quvvatlari va 158 mingta ish o'rinlari yaratildi. Bu umumiy ish o'rinlarining 58% ni tashkil qiladi. Xizmat sohasida esa 7 mingta obyektlarda ish o'rinlari quvvatlar ishga tushirish natijasida 78 mingta ish o'rinlari yaratildi. Bu umumiy ish o'rinlarining 28% ni tashkil etadi. Hamda 3975 ta qishloq xo'jaligi sohasida quvvatlar yaratilib, 37 mingta ish o'rinlari yaratildi va bu 14% ni tashkil etdi. 20 22-yilda ham biz bu ishni davom ettirmoqchimiz. Avvalambor prezidentimiz tomonidan bizga maqsad qo'yilgan, shu kambag'alchilikni qisqartirish maqsadida 300 mingta ish o'rnini yaratish bo'yicha. Shuning uchun demak 22-yildagi investitsiya dasturida biz 15-17 milliard dollarlik 9,5 mingta loyihalarni o'z muddatida ishga tushirish natijasida 300 mingta ish o'rnini yaratish choralarini ko'ramiz. Shu bilan birga mana yuqorida demak oldingi plenar sessiyamizda ham prezidentimiz aytdilar, 17-yilda boshlanganda bizda xalq bilan muloqot yili edi. Xalq bilan muloqot yili bo'lganda bizda xalq qabulxonalari tashkil qilingan, biz bevosita tumanlarga tushgan edik. 22-21-yillarda mana Obidjon akam yuqorida aytib o'tdilar, mahallabay tizimi tashkil qilish natijasida biz endi respublikamizdagi bevosita demak mahallalarga tushib ishlarni tashkil qilyapmiz. U yerda demak mana hokim yordamchilari degan institut tashkil etildi. Hokim yordamchilarini demak faoliyatini tashkil etishdan eng asosiy maqsad bu davlat siyosatini mahallagacha tushirish, aholini bandligini ta'minlash, ularning daromadini ko'paytirish hamda tadbirkorlikni rivojlantirish bo'lib, shu orqali kambag'allikni qisqartirish hisoblanadi. Bizda investitsiya vazirligida ham 24 ta shahar va tumanlarga o'zimizning xodimlarimizni yuborganmiz, respublika vakillari sifatida, va ular joylarga borib bevosita mahallabay tizim orqali demak xonadonlarni o'rganish bo'yicha ishlarni amalga oshirishyapti. Shu bilan birga demak davlat investitsiya dasturi doirasida 22-yilda biz 770 milliard dollarga teng bo'lgan 282 ta yirik va ahamiyatli loyihalarni ishga tushiramiz va 43 mingta yangi ish o'rnlarini yaratamiz. Endi bu yerda ko'plab misollarni keltirish mumkin. Mana slaydga ahamiyat beradigan bo'lsanglar, demak 22-yilda ham 282 ta yirik loyihalarni ishga tushiradigan bo'lsak, endi hududiy loyihalardan belgilanganda 9 mingdan ortiq bo'lgan 8 milliard dollarlik loyihalarni ishga tushirib, biz 234 mingta ish o'rni yaratishni rejalashtirganmiz. Mana slayddan ko'rinib turibdi, biz bu loyihalarni demak 3 ta kategoriyaga bo'lganmiz. 10 milliondan yuqori bo'lgan loyihalar, 1 milliondan 10 milliongacha bo'lgan loyihalar demak o'rta loyihalar hisoblanadi, hamda 1 milliongacha bo'lgan loyihalar demak kichik loyihalar hisoblanadi. Mazkur loyihalarni hammasini ishga tushirishimiz natijasida 27,5 trillion so'mlik mahsulotlar ishlab chiqarish quvvatlari yaratilishi demak yo'lga qo'yiladi. Endi buni demak yo'nalishlar bo'yicha oladigan bo'lsak, sanoat yo'nalishida bizda 412 milliard dollarlik 3126 ta loyihalarda 136 mingta ish o'rni yaratiladi. Xizmat ko'rsatish sohasida 2.8 milliard dollarlik 4247 ta loyihalarda 71 mingta ish o'rnlari yaratiladi, hamda qishloq xo'jaligi yo'nalishida qiymati 1 milliard dollarlik bo'lgan 2000 ta loyihalarda 27 mingta ish o'rni yaratish belgilangan. Shu bilan birga demak mana shu har bitta yirik, o'rta va kichik loyihalarga biz loyiha bilan ishlash natijasida har bittasiga demak bevosita insonlarni biriktirganmiz. Shu yirik loyihalarimizga tegishli tarmoq rahbarlari va o'rinbosarlari biriktirilgan. O'rta loyihalarga bevosita shu hududda hokim o'rinbosarlari va viloyat boshqarmalari boshqalar biriktirilgan, hamda qiymati 1 million dollardan kam bo'lgan 7357 ta kichik loyihalarga joylardagi shahar va tuman hokimlarining o'rinbosarlari va tuman bo'limlari boshliqlari shaxsan biriktirilgan. Buni biz har kunlik nazoratini olib boramiz. Har haftada shu loyiha tizimi bo'yicha vazir o'rinbosarlari darajasida buni demak tahlili bo'ladi va oyda bir marta shu hukumat komissiyasiga olib chiqib bu ishlarni ko'rib boramiz. 3 ta etapda buni nazoratini olganmiz. Demak tuman, viloyat, respublika, ya'ni 3 pog'onali tizim joriy etilgan. Buning uchun demak 207 ta shahar va tumanlarimizda 414 ta mutaxassislardan iborat tuman shahar loyiha guruhlari tashkil etilgan va 14 ta hududlarimizda 56 mutaxassisdan iborat hududiy loyiha guruhlari tashkil etilgan. Respublikada esa demak bevosita demak markaziy loyiha ofisimiz bor. Biz mana shu kambag'alchilikni qisqartirish masalasi bo'yicha aytganda asosan shu bandlik nuqtai nazaridan ishchi o'rinlari yaratishga e'tibor berganmiz. Mana 22-yilda ham shu narsa olib borildi. Endi har bitta tumanda, har bitta mahallada bu ishlarni amalga oshirish uchun biz tumanlarni o'zini bir qancha kategoriyaga bo'lib oldik. Masalan, 111 ta tumanda aholi eng ko'p yashaydigan aholi soni bo'lgan tumanlar bo'lsa, 27 ta sanoat rivojlangan tumanlar bor. Shu sanoat rivojlangan tumanlarda biz kooperatsiyani rivojlantirish orqali aholini ish bilan ta'minlash choralarini ko'ramiz. 115 ta tumanda esa qishloq xo'jaligini rivojlantiradigan tumanlar, 25 ta chegara oldi tumanlar va 45 ta yirik turistik markazlari mavjud bo'lgan tumanlar mavjud. Har bittasini o'zini spesifikasiyadan kelib chiqqan holatda ularni o'sish nuqtalarini belgilaymiz va istiqbolli investitsiya loyihalarini puxta ishlab chiqiladi. Biz joylarga borganda mana shu loyiha guruhlari bilan birgalikda demak hokim yordamchilarini bevosita faoliyatini ham nazoratga olib borib, bir-biri bilan nima deydi, muvozanatda kelishgan holda ishlaydi. Mana shu slaydga ahamiyat bersanglar, mana birinchi kvartal masalasida ishga tushgan loyihalarni qanday nazorat olishi, har kunlik nazorat yo'lga qo'yilgan. Misol uchun mana 22-25-martda bizda 17 ta proyekt ishga tushadi, 4.9 million dollarlik 187 ish o'rni yaratiladi. Bunda demak 4 tasi o'rta loyiha bo'lsa, demak 13 tasi kichik loyiha. Xuddi shunga o'xshagan 26-31 mart kunlari 60 ta loyihalar ishga tushadi va buning natijasida umumiy hisobda 2,5 mingta ish o'rni yaratiladi. Har kunlik, har soatlik anaqa nazoratga olingan va demak prezidentimiz ta'birlar bilan aytganda mahallabay tizim ishi tashkil qilingan. Biz oldin tumanlarga tushgan bo'lsak, endi har bitta loyiha investitsiya loyihalari demak mahallada bormi yo'qmi, shu demak 9 mingtadan ortiq mahallada har bittasida investitsion loyihalarni qilish hamda hokim yordamchilari orqali demak aholining daromadini oshirish va tadbirkorlikka jalb qilish bo'yicha ishlarni olib boryapmiz. Qisqacha hisobotim tugadi. Rahmat.
Rahmat sizga, Olimxon aka. Now I would like to give a floor to Matilda Dimovska. As I mentioned before, she represents UNDP in Uzbekistan. And indeed, as was mentioned by Abidaka earlier, I spent almost 10 years of my life with UNDP, and I have lots of respect for this organization because it was always at the forefront of the fighting poverty, even in the countries where, as absolutely rightly mentioned, it was not accepted. Actually, two words were not allowed. It's not only poverty, it was welfare improvement, but second was gender. And today when the President was giving his speech, he specifically highlighted the gender equality. So I feel a lot of relief and pride that we are moving quite, steady in a direction when we don't have the banned words and we start finally addressing the challenges and trying to make an impact on the society. Matilda comes with lots of experience from UNDP in other countries. So she was a deputy head of office of UNDP in Moldova, in Turkey, in Georgia. So the countries with a very much similar backgrounds, and also in terms of economic development, I'm sure that many challenges will come on. Uzbekistan is not unique and is not the country that just develops on its own. So I believe you will be able to reflect in general on the issue of poverty reduction, on UNDP's experience, but then also maybe shed a light on what we should know from the experience from other places as well. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Rahmat, Aziz, Aziza. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. Yes, and many thanks for giving the space to United Nations Development Program, and I kind of feel obliged to speak on the topic of poverty reduction. But first, it was a successful start of this event. I want to congratulate the government of organizing it, and it was very important, the tone that was set at the very first session, the plenary one, when human dignity was clearly centered or put as a compass of the overall development, the development vision, and with the human dignity put at the center. You already mentioned in Uzbekistan poverty, and I was not here in 2016 when the word of poverty was not being mentioned, but I was here when the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance invited us, the international community, to speak about the poverty reduction in Uzbekistan, and that was early 2020. Yeah, January. And my feedback was we don't often get the ministers of finance talking, wanting us to discuss about the poverty reduction. And then the line of actions that have been taken by the government to address it have been already covered. I will not mention, but the significance of having a poverty line set last year was extremely important, and it's only a starting point, I guess. But that was a kind of immediate reaction. I wanted to, from a UNDP perspective, I will give three broader points, in fact. First, within the overall development vision that we've heard about, I think it is important to start with stressing that talking about addressing poverty and inequality is about investment in human capital, a topic that we have heard and a topic of interest of many to work, and particularly, of course, of the government. So human capital or capabilities of the people is the basis for sustainable human and economic, of course, development. The point is that those human capabilities that are needed evolved over time, and they have been impacted by the COVID crisis. We are also to reflect on the COVID. The fact that the human capital became more complex and not only based on the basic human capabilities that are developed based on the income, based on the access to health or education, has been very much studied. 2019 Human Development Report that UNDP produces argued that that the 21st century is asking the people, asking from people, that they don't have only the basic capabilities, those that are related to good income, health, and education, but that they need so-called enhanced capabilities. And those are capabilities for the 21st century: good internet access, good environment, clean and balanced environment, access to green jobs, voices being more heard. And this is, are becoming capabilities that are even more important than are the basics ones, because they are ultimately more empowering. And I was therefore very much impressed by the presentation of Mr. Terzioglu during the previous session, when he was stressing the importance of the internet for the refugees as a basic human right. And in fact, that expectation is evolving. Earlier this year, UNDP did a very brief report, a special report on human security that was looking into to the changing expectations and concerns of the people. And that report showed that even though we are, as humans, we are living in a much wealthier world, we have more income, we have better education, etc., we still feel insecure, even more insecure, and even in the developing countries. And concerns like COVID, but also digital technology, climate change, biodiversity laws are becoming very, very much more important for the people. So that was the starting point. But the second point is, and the lessons learned from COVID was that that over the COVID, some of these trends have been changed, the previous trends that we had in terms of poverty and inequality, but some of the new trends have been even more reinforced. For example, due to COVID, and we all know it, due to pandemic, it was first time after 20 years that the world saw increase in the poverty levels. About 100 million people were put into the poverty this time, and a category of new poor emerged. And those are young people, urbanized, working in the informal sector, some from the emerging middle class. So that was the global thing. And then also when we zoom on the inequalities, also the inequalities saw a high rise, at a record highs, with the bottom of 40% of people earning less than 8% of the global wealth, and on the other side we have 10% that are earning more than a half of the global wealth, which basically says that the goal of leaving no one behind for the 40% bottom line is not good. We are not in target. So the key point is that also we saw that during the COVID that the pre-existing inequalities amplified, and those related to the access to internet, to education, technology, that those were increasing. And all of that, of course, with a huge impact on the social compact, social cohesion and compact within the societies. Now, the two key points that I wish to make out of this is that that countries, of course, reacted on that. And many policies were put in place to address the increasing poverty, increasing inequalities. But the key lessons that were there is that it is not, those policies are not successful if they are pushing only for pushing people above the poverty levels. But fundamental revisiting of the human development investments basically is needed to keep the people, the poor, below the poverty line, but also to empower them so that they take the opportunities and move forward. They don't go back again into the poverty line. And the second point that comes out of all of this, all of the response to COVID was that basically that may have been gone, or COVID in some countries, but the new trends are here or are emerging, and they will remain. And we need to get prepared, and we need to get our systems, our policies well prepared, resilient, and forward-looking, so that they anticipate and take into account and anticipate any development emergencies in the future. And we don't need to go very far to understand the risks that, for example, in our case, in our Uzbekistan, what is the threat, that development emergency that may be very critical, one or a number of those. Now, about the poverty context in Uzbekistan, I think Mr. Hakimov mentioned very much. We have seen, of course, lifting 2.2 billion people over the past 10 years, I think, or 20 years out of the poverty. But of course, during the COVID crisis, around 1 million are estimated to have fallen into the poverty again. Social benefits doubled in 2020, reached around more than 1 million people, and so on. And the policies became much more geared toward poverty reduction. And the goal of halving the poverty by 2026 is, and achieving the upper and middle income status has been set. But the point that I want to make around that is that these ambitious, very ambitious goals will require, of course, a much bigger effort and investment. And that's the final point, in fact, that within this context, within the expectation of or likelihood to have more crises in the future, the policies will have to be smart and innovative, or what, so that they address poverty and inequality as an investment in the human capital, but human capital of the future. So I think we have a lot of evidences, a lot of body of evidence of what worked or not in other contexts, and I think that much of the key elements of such a integrated, smart policies were already mentioned. I will go only to the headlines. One is the necessity to develop a new poverty and inequality metrics, tools, measurements, with the understanding that it is beyond the income. The poverty is not only about income, but to look from the deeper into the multi-dimensional aspects of vulnerability, poverty, and inequality. And for that, new metrics is needed and new ways of getting it. I'm very glad that we have already started working with the center, together with the colleagues from UNICEF, of setting of a national multi-dimensional poverty matrix for Uzbekistan that will give us that type of information of the multiple deprivations. The second point is, critical element of the combined policies is expanding and lifting the social protection. And that means that using the social protection system not only to protect, but to empower and transform. And the question is how to do it. And I believe that the concept of the social protection system that Uzbekistan already has adopted has the key element of it, meaning the integration of a social insurance, social assistance, social services with the employment programs, so that they move beyond those package of policies, move beyond the protection of the vulnerable, but rather expand the capabilities of people and produce future-proof workers. And the third is around the informality. We need to make a business case about investing and empowering into the missing middle or those that work in the informal sector, and to kind of needle the poverty, the inequality, and looking into the informality in a new way, finding a new way to avail them the new skills, to get them, encourage them work into the green sector, to make them covered with the social protection and so on, with a new, in a new different way. And finally is one topic that is very close to the heart of UNDP in Uzbekistan as well, future of work, meaning getting ready the workforce of Uzbekistan for the future. And I'm very glad, I think it was mentioned also in the previous, in the plenary session, meaning to define what will be, the future-proof work, what will the demand of the future look, what is the ecosystem of, which is, because it's not only a single sector, ecosystem of the creation of such a workforce, and setting the direction fast. So I think I exhausted too much of the time. I will stop here. I think this is the time to reflect of the past and then set the strategies for the future. And it's an excellent event for that. We find in UNDP that job creation is at the core of the poverty reduction. The mere title of the Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction probably is reflective of that in some way or the other. That in Uzbekistan, the young people, the huge potential of this country can only be utilized if given an opportunity to work. But it's not only about the work, it's about a decent work, and it's not only about decent work, it's about the work of the future. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matilda, for your very interesting insights. And I'm really grateful that you were able holistically link in a very good way the issue of the poverty reduction with the very pressing issue of the COVID. Just before the session, we exchanged some words with the His Excellency Ambassador of Austria to Uzbekistan, and he was just sharing that, for example, Europe again is hit by COVID. So it seems to be like constant troublemaker, and it means that the governments will have to reevaluate its competency to be able to address this challenge. And it's not something that may fade away quickly. So we or governments have to be prepared to respond to this issue, and that's why it's important that the distribution of social welfare is done in the most possible just way to benefit those people that otherwise are poor, or they will be, as you said, the missing middle. That all makes governments be more anticipatory, prepared to deal with the complexity, be able to address the weak issues, so cross-sectorial, work together with different units of the government to address the very important response to COVID or any other big pandemic that may hit the way. Now I would like, with a great pleasure, to give a floor to Philippe Orliange, who represents, as I mentioned before, the French Development Agency. And in Uzbekistan, we know lots of development partners, technical assistance partners. However, the French Development Agency seems to be present in the country for more than 5 years and does some great work. Philippe is a career diplomat, so he spent his life working for the Embassy of France in different continents. So I was able to see South Africa in your bio, as well as countries in Latin America. That is always very interesting for me as an economist by training. I always find fascinating some similarities in terms of political economy between Central Asia and Latin America, even though it's not it's very counterintuitive for many people in this place. And it would be great to hear your views, your sharings, your insights on the subject discussed.
Thank you very much, Aziza. Thanks for inviting me to take part in this panel. and share with you some insights. You also invited us to share some thought-provoking views. It's always a bit risky when speaking to a foreign audience to propose thought-provoking views, but maybe I'll try that one too, on the condition that other panelists do the same. I noted with great interest in the presentation that Mr. Hakimov made about the Center for Economic Research and Reform, that one of their projects is being developed based on the methods used by Esther Duflo and Mr. Banerjee. And it's very interesting because Esther Duflo is also advising the French Development Agency, sharing one of our panels. So it is also for us a source of inspiration that I'm glad to see that we share that and probably many other things with the center. You invited us to talk about economics of poverty. I think we cannot do that forgetting the context in which this discussion takes place, mainly a context of a succession of crises. The pandemic crisis is not over yet. We have war in Ukraine, and this comes on top of a long-term crisis, the one of climate change, which is already producing tangible impacts and which also has an impact on poverty. A few minutes ago, you mentioned the missing middle. Of course, this is also a very important topic. It is in Central Asia, it is in Latin America, and it is in Europe too. The fact that middle classes suffer under the current crisis, but that doesn't change the fact that the poor are hit first and harder than the rest of the population for a number of reasons that previous speakers have already outlined: lack of savings, loss of employment, poor housing, and so on. And this means that without support or assistance, they don't have any other options than to reduce their consumption or endure even worse living conditions. So this is clearly an issue that must be tackled head-on. And also, by way of introduction, I'd like to stress the fact that all these crises that form the context of the background of our discussions are themselves intertwined, as we can see in the case of energy, which is at the same time a geopolitical crisis, an economic one, but with heavy social consequences. And we've seen that in France, as you know. Now, if we move on to the policy response, including that the French Development Agency can contribute to support the poorest in such crisis, I'd like to stress 5 points. The first one is that we should not wait till the next crisis to tackle poverty. We are in 2022, and it seems that a long time ago, that was in 2015, the world adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, thanks, among other things, to the very good work of UNDP. And one of the key messages of the SDGs was to leave no one behind. So this should be reminded constantly. It was there in 2015, and it remains 7 years later a major priority. And in this regard, what Uzbekistan has established as its priorities with the ambitious goal announced by the President to halve the poverty rate by 2026 fits perfectly within that agenda. We also know that, for instance, exiting fossil fuels requires a strong body of social policies to cater for the impact of such policies on the poor. We also know that the issue of tackling poverty is not only an income issue, and some of the previous speakers have referred to a number of policies which are directly relevant. I would add to the list For instance, providing basic support, basic services like clean water. And I mention them because these are policies that AfD is working on in Uzbekistan with the government in areas such as livestock and water and sanitation. That was my first point. My second point is looks more at the issue of how can we do that. And here I'd like to point out two examples, two issues which I think are of relevance, and maybe one belongs to the category of thought-provoking views. The first one is the use of cash transfer programs that have been in the picture for many years as a tool to tackle poverty, and which has been sort of revisited in the context of COVID-19. And we as AfD have been working with that, especially in Brazil, the country where I was posted until last year, with a major program launched by Brazil and supported by 6 financial institutions, which was also a good example of cooperation between financial institutions. And those cash transfer program help enormously mitigate the impact of the COVID crisis in Brazil. The second is tax reform. This is something that is often overlooked, but which featured very highly in the Addis Ababa conference in 2015. And here again, the COVID crisis has shed some light on the urgent need in many countries for tax reform or reforms, aiming at raising more revenue, but doing it in such a way that it is fair and also socially acceptable. It is very difficult, when you look at it, to finance public policies when your tax to GDP ratio is at 15%. And this is not so much a divide between rich and poor country. You've got large emerging countries with a ratio of 15%, and you've got less rich country with a higher contribution of taxes. And I understand that in Uzbekistan things have been moving in the right direction in recent years. My third point has to do with the multidimensional character of many current crises. For instance, while a crisis such as the COVID crisis reinforces the need for public spending to mitigate the crisis, it simultaneously affects budget revenues, thus creating budget tension in the context of deteriorated financial conditions on the international markets, for instance. And this generates conflicting objectives in terms of public policies. I mention that because then the risk is that policies which have negative impact on the poor become prioritized, thus aggravating the situation of the poorest segment of the population. And that leads to the conclusion that if we are serious about leaving no one behind, this should be taken into consideration when setting the sort of counter-cyclical policies. My fourth point is that in time of crisis, one of the roles of financial institutions is to provide the national governments with the capacity, the additional capacity to finance these priorities at the moment when often private capital is turning away or shying away from taking more crisis. We've done that in Uzbekistan when we provided a budget loan of 150 million in 2020 in response to the COVID crisis, and we've done that in many other countries, and we also foresee that in the context of the Ukrainian crisis, we might have to also provide this sort of support, and we're trying to do that increasingly, working jointly with the European Union and European partners in the context of a Team Europe initiative. And my fifth and last point has to do with the fact that our mandate is focusing to a large extent on the issue of climate change. And this does not take us away from looking at the issue of poverty. Increasingly, we see that the climate crisis and the poverty issues are intertwined. That the poor in many countries will be the one most affected by climate change, the one most in need of policies in terms of adaptation to climate change and so on. So this is not a different subject. This is the same subject. This is another facet of the subject which needs to be looked at. This is, among other things, at the heart of our cooperation with UNDP here in Uzbekistan, and the AFD really consider it of great importance that public policies look at these two issues in a consistent manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for your very interesting insights. And I would like to second you on the issue of climate change, because I just visited Tamdi. It's a small, it's a big district, very far from Tashkent, 3 hours drive from Navai. And even though Navai region is one of the richest in terms of regional output, Tamdi is a different story, and the issue is that they're facing the shortage of water for the second year in a row. There is no water to breed animals, and there is no water to drink. So unfortunately, regardless which part of the planet we live, we are all facing the increasing pressure from the climate change. And even the fact that we have in March so many rainy days in Tashkent, trust me, it's very unusual. As a local, I can tell you that we don't remember Marches like this because it was never so rainy. And the winter was super dry, so we see physically how the climate change affects the livelihoods of people in the rural area, again hitting the bottom rock for the poor, but also for people like us living in a quite good environment in the cities, we also see the changes. Thank you very much. Last but not the least, it was a great pleasure. I would like to give a floor to Eric Livni. And Eric works for EBRD, so he is the person who is an outlook for economic development in the region, but also he was based for quite some time in Georgia. And when we discussed with Eric what should be the focus of presentation, we agreed that it would be really great to hear about specifically the role of education in alleviating the poverty. And again, here I would like to synchronize with what President said during the plenary. So we're going to increase the intake of children for the preschool, in the school, in the higher education. And all of you were able to see specific targets that President indicated today. That's great. But then let's see how other countries already did some progress, and we would be able to get some lessons learned. Because I would love us to leave this forum today, when we all go home, with some lessons learned, with some ideas. And for Eric, we have slides. Can I ask to put slides on the screen, please? And I also would like to give you a heads up. We like interaction. We still will be able to have 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So those of you that would like to give a comment or a question, feel free to prepare. And we don't have anybody assigned. It's up to you. So Eric, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aziza. I first came to Uzbekistan in 2010. I traveled through the Central Asia and South Caucasus. And when I came here and I went to Samarkand, I didn't go there to see the beautiful touristic sites, but I had some business to do. But I also walked around the neighborhoods of Samarkand. I went to see the synagogue there in the old city. But one thing that struck me in Samarkand, but also later also in Tashkent, is that it's clean. It's very clean. And I was surprised, and I wanted to understand why it is clean, why there's no mess. And I came from Georgia, where I lived, and it's super messy. And the answer I got was, well, we have the mahalla. And we spoke about mahallas just seconds ago. We have the mahallas everywhere, cities and rural areas. Everything is organized in communities. And the community owns the place. The community owns the public space. It's not somebody else's, it's there. They take care of it. They clean it, they maintain it, they take care of the space, and by the way, they also take care of themselves. And I thought, wow, this is something else. This is different. And because I haven't seen anything like that in other countries, which are total mess, I must say. So this is just to say that Uzbekistan maybe doesn't look very good in terms of numbers in some indices or whatnot. I actually believe that in terms of poverty and many other issues, Uzbekistan is in a much better place than lots of other nations in our part of the world. Now, I want to talk about education, and I'll come to it in a second, but first, I want to show you this slide, and let me first explain when did I see this slide for the first time in my life. Because you see the date on this slide is 2016-17, and by the way, my career with the EBRD started only 2 years ago. So this is predating my time with the EBRD. So I, at the time, in 2016 and 17, I was based in Georgia, and I was heading a small university, a school of economics, International School of Economics in Tbilisi. And I was hosting in the school, in a room half the size of this room, I was hosting an EBRD economist, a guy basically doing my job today, presenting something called the EBRD Transition Report. And it just so happened that this particular report focused on issues of income inequality and the inequality of opportunity. And this slide was shown, except that there were no red circles. So the red circles that you now see, they're my addition. I added them yesterday night before sending to Aziza. The original slide didn't have Georgia circled, for example. And I was sitting in the audience, I was listening to this EBRD economist presenting this study, I was looking at the slide, and I see Georgia in a very particular place on this slide. That's a very particular place, you will agree with me. It's the top rightmost corner of this slide, which means, if I translate it into human language, it means that Georgia has the most inequality of opportunity, meaning that it's furthest to the right, and it also has the highest income inequality of all the countries in which the EBRD works. And I was like, wow, again, there was another wow. Not about Uzbekistan, this time it was about Georgia. What does Georgia do wrong to be in the right topmost corner on this chart? It's not a good place to be. You know, where you want to be on this chart is where Croatia is, for example, the bottom left, yeah? Croatia is a good place, Slovenia is a fantastic place, maybe Bosnia, okay? These are the places I want to be. Instead, Georgia is furthest to the right and to the top. What's going on? And then I realized that actually one major element of the picture that is missing in Georgia is public education. Public education in Georgia, simply, I'll say it in very poor English, it sucks. Okay, so if you have a little bit of money, you send your child to a private school, and private schools are pretty good. If you are in a rural area, or in a neighborhood, remote neighborhood, not central neighborhood of Tbilisi, sorry, you only have the public option, and the public option is terrible. It's just terrible, it doesn't work. Now, what is the main function of the education system and the public education system? It is exactly to provide for social mobility. It's exactly about giving children the opportunity to move from where they are, and this is how this was constructed. So if Georgia is to the right, it means that if you are born into a certain family, into certain circumstances, you will die in the same circumstances. That's what it means. So if you're born poor, you will die poor. That's what being on the right means. So education, and we talked about education just now, is exactly that mechanism to make sure that people born in poor circumstances can still move. It's about opportunity. Then I ask myself the next slide, please. What can be done about education? Unfortunately, when you look at education systems and how they perform, you find a very, very strong correlation between income per capita, how rich or poor countries are, and how well they perform in education. So this is a terrible, terrible thing. It means that if a country is poor, right, it means that it will also be not educating well. You know, if a country is poor and it wants to catch up, what it has to do, it has to invest more than anybody else in education. because it has to catch up, right? But the statistical studies, and this example is PISA. If you know PISA, the program for international study assessment, student assessment, I believe, it's conducted by the OECD. And this one example, it has the mean science score on the vertical. So science, physics, etc. It's on the vertical, and on the horizontal, you see the GDP per capita. So the correlation is very, very strong. So if you are a country like, I don't know, let's say Uzbekistan, you would be very far to the left because you're very poor, and statistically, you are also very likely to be very low. So your mean science score, or mean language score, or mean mathematics score, any mean score is going to be very low. I don't know if Uzbekistan is in the PISA system. I don't know. You're planning to be very good. I congratulate you. You're talking of measurement and monitoring. So if you will join, you will discover that you will be somewhere very low. Also on the left, because you are not a wealthy country. So you are doomed. Is it so? And the answer is not necessarily. And in order to understand why not necessarily, I circled Vietnam for you. So the little red circle on the left is Vietnam. Now, if you look at this country, it's as poor, and maybe poorer. I looked at, for example, in 2010, the data for Vietnam, it was so poor that it wasn't even in the chart. You know, from the income per capita was so low that it wasn't fitting the chart. Very poor. Somehow, and you have to ask yourself, how come Vietnam is all the way up? And it's true for science, it's true for math, it's true for language. Vietnam is almost at the level of, not at the level of Singapore. Singapore is a city, right? There's no rural population, so it has to have a very good performance in any education test. But it's almost at the level of Estonia, almost at the level of Korea, almost at the level of Finland, which are recognized world leaders. How come? This is the question I'm asking, and the answer is amazingly well-organized public education system. This is what it means. This is how you achieve it. How you do that? You make sure that the child in Namangan, you mentioned Namangan before, the child in Andijan, in Fergana, in Nukus, this is as far as I got to in Uzbekistan, the child in every one of these places will get exactly the same education as the child in Tashkent, in the best neighborhood of Tashkent. This is how you achieve this. That's the only way. Finland, by the way, the leader in education, actually has such a system in place. For 1 year in my life, I devoted to actually establishing a Finnish school in Georgia. It was my 1-year project. But it's not what's special about Finland. It's not about having an amazing one single school. This is not what makes Finland unique. What makes Finland unique is that every school in Finland is as good as any other. So anywhere you go in Finland, in Lapland or in Helsinki, everywhere you get the same teachers, the same school director, the same roughly mix of children from every kind of family. There's no segregation, not by gender, not by religion, not by color, everybody together, and certainly not by wealth. And then you get to the top of this chart. So what I'm trying to say here, you are not yet a wealthy nation, but you're much better organized than many other nations. That's what I started with. You're much better organized. You have fantastic community structure at the basis of the society. And if you do the right things, if you implement not just numbers, but if you actually implement a system that delivers the same sort of thing, the same sort of education, starting from preschools, we have to make sure that preschools are also taken care of. We will be where Vietnam is, and maybe better. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Eric, you also wanted to share some thoughts about the COVID and the poverty, right? So maybe you could reflect a bit on this as well.
It's not much. My daughter just happens to be an educational psychologist in Israel. I'm Israeli. I didn't say that, sorry. And she's been studying, in fact, how kids perform. This was the subject of her dissertation. And she studied how kids perform during COVID. She found, actually, that children can do okay in remote mode, in distance learning. They can do okay in face-to-face. The worst you can have is when they're confused. The worst outcome is when they are moving in and out, they lose motivation, they lose focus, and they're completely disoriented. And when you ask them, she ran surveys. So when you ask them, about satisfaction, ability to learn, ability to focus, to prepare for exams, terrible, terrible results, especially when there's on and off situation. Yeah, that was my little insight from my daughter, and research-based. Thank you very much.
Empirically proven. Thank you very much, Eric. I would like to add something that I think is important for the context setting for the modern Uzbekistan in terms of higher education. Uzbekistan was infamously known for its 9%, one of the lowest at the level of sub-Sahara, access to tertiary education, according to the World Bank, and it was pre-2016 time. And of course, it would be impossible by government to do themselves the leapfrog. So I personally welcome the fact that Uzbekistan liberalized, and now we have so many private universities. My husband, with his partners, opened also a private university. The programs are validated by the British University, so they teach only in English. We have 40% of teachers and professors are PhD holders from Western universities or foreigners. And you can see, I think now is more than 60 private universities in Uzbekistan like this. So I think that when there is a political will, it's quite easy to catch up and really be able to compensate for a very long time of, inadequate access to education, be it the public schools, be it preschool or higher education. It's just a matter of the political will, and at least in higher education, I think all of us can see a very visible development that took place, and hopefully that will make Uzbekistan a bit closer to the right approach to multifaceted, multidimensional poverty. Because as many of you spoke today, our respected and highly esteemed speakers, the poverty is not about income per se, it's about the different aspects that shape the life of people and give or give not the chance to live a better life. I'm trying to be disciplined, so we have the 10 minutes remaining, but I still would like to open the floor if there is anybody in the room, and I hope there will be people, willing to share their remarks, reflect, ask a question, or share their story. Is there anybody in the room? Yes, please. Please introduce yourself. I don't think we have a mic, and I ask, there is no the mic that could be transferred, but I'm happy to invite you, yeah, or we can maybe speak up. I think Obideke would like to respond.
Yeah, the amount which is told today in the morning, 10 billion, this is the IFC's estimate, which is for the whole SME. But this $1 billion, this is just, we have this deputy hakims for each mahalla, and each deputy hakim, they have 1 billion sum fund every year. This is fund only provided from the central government. So the local governments also, they also provide the funds also. So this funds, it's only for small household level enterprises. But this doesn't include other businesses. So yes, there is another studies, we know that, according to the recent study which, has been done in our center. So we assessed that, the unrealized, the capacity of the business in Uzbekistan, we estimated about $5 billion. Yes, but we know that this kind of gap exists. But, the government steadily is increasing this gap, closing this gap. So for the next 5 years, we have plans about $120 billion investment projects. And, that this will help us to achieve our main goal, which is, increase the GDP up to the 100 billion and, reach the GDP per capita to $2,800. It's welcomed, yes, always welcomed, yes, microfinance. They are really active right now in these days. So there is no limitation for the microfinancing, or, the people are talking about the different types of small financing in the operations in Uzbekistan these days, because, what I think, the microfinance or any other types of financing, so, when the fintech, is taking over. So nowadays in Uzbekistan, we already see that, the 3-4, the very progressive fintech companies, they are really, really growing faster. So I think that in the next 10 years in Uzbekistan also, conventional banking system also will be completely transformed to the kind of, the fintech companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions that we can take? There is one thing that we missed, and it's very important that we do not conclude the roundtable without properly addressing this. I would like to ask Matilda to reflect on the issue of the gender aspect in the poverty reduction.
Well, I think we don't have time to address it properly, so we don't claim that we have spoken about it, but I think it deserves to be mentioned, and thank you, Aziza, that at the very beginning also you mentioned in it. And it is, part and parcel of any poverty alleviation effort, the looking into the gender aspect of it. Gender equality has many different aspects, but we do understand that economic empowerment is a very important element if we are to think of political empowerment and any other engagement in the society. In the case of Uzbekistan, we do have a case to focus on it. Participation in the labor force is 40, I think, for women versus 60 for men. Higher are the rates in terms of the unemployment. We all well know about the salary gap and so on. Now, I wish to say that therefore the systemic approach is needed, therefore, and addressing the issue on a different levels. Entrepreneurship development, access to loans, particularly targeting women, then women getting into, encouraging women to get into the jobs of the future, into the green jobs, and financially encouraging that, incentivizing, education, investing into, and particularly targeting the women engagement into what we call STEM, science and technology and mathematics, gender-sensitive, gender-responsive social protection systems that don't punish, let's put it that way, do not punish women for taking care of the family as well. And then I think important the stereotypes, the gender stereotypes that kind of even internally are problems sometimes for women. And I'm glad to note also, to finish that the recent resolution that was adopted in March, I think this year has many of the government on that topic, has many elements of it. And of course, it's of high interest of everyone, including UNDP. Thank you very much for mentioning it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matilda. Now, we're officially moving to the part of conclusion. And while we were able to hear so many great ideas and interesting thoughts about the subject, I would like to take a liberty just to maybe highlight those that I thought would resonate, or at least it resonates with me, so I'm in a way occupying the role of moderator, trying to highlight those. I heard today from Abideka that there is a plan to establish the ministerial or official government entity to deal with the centralized and unified approach to the social protection. That includes always, and it's classic, it's something that ILO and World Bank and UN are preaching. It's not just social allowances, but it's also social services and social insurance and policy making in general. So I heard that it's being in a pipeline and hopefully will come through. It's very important because institutional design will help us to effectively spend money that government, as we see, releases, but may not be always reaching the poorest of the poor. Second thing is very important. I think the overall COVID pandemic showed around the world, not only in Uzbekistan, around the world, how it's important to act transparently, that every dollar that is being spent is spent in a way that more or less understood by public, by civil society, by beneficiaries, and would not raise lots of questions. So that applies to all countries around the world. But it's important that we also pin this down as something that could be potentially the principle of work, but also something that we all should pay attention to. The notion of multidimensional poverty is something, again, that is important because sometimes, simplistically, we may think it's only about money, but it's not. So whenever we see that it's intertwining issues, the response should also be holistic. I've been asked many times by people, so what's for you is a progress? And maybe it's a bit naive, but I would say that I think the ultimate goal is to see the life changing in the rural area and the life of the girl. If the life of the girl in the rural area changes and she's no more worried about having, school without heating or, the need to walk to take the water, if things like this change, we've got tremendous success. It will take years. It may take 10 years, 20, but it's important that we see the light at the end of the tunnel and that we are, very committed to go in the right direction. And I'm sure we are, because from what we heard from 2 presentations today, and I'm very grateful for Olam Honekia and Abidekia, I see that there is a vision, clear vision in the government, and there is an action plan that supports the vision. So the glass is definitely half full, and we have the very clear direction where we are heading to. It's just important to make sure that we are doing whatever is needed to support the vision that was shared by the President. And last but not the least, I see a lot of value of having discussions like this when we have mixed speakers. So we have people from the government sharing, and it's important that we acknowledge that they're making tremendous effort, and we're all grateful. But it's also people who are providing non-biased, the external view on the situation, sharing their experiences, reflecting, provoking, as Philip said. So maybe asking some question that may trigger all of us, reevaluate the situation and come even to a better results afterwards. So I have a privilege of being here today with you in the last 1.5 hours. I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful to our fantastic speakers, but also for audience, for your interest, for your patience, and also for your active learning. I see you nodding, you were reacting. It's very pleasing. Thank you very much, and wishing you productive rest of the forum. Thank you.